Welcome to AI for Good, the leading, action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies, in partnership with 50+ UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another one of the discovery session on AI for biodiversity. Overall, the AI for Good seminar series are seeking to identify innovative AI applications, build skills and standards, and advance partnerships to solve global challenges. And this particular series is focused on the global challenge of wide-scale biodiversity loss and how we can work to protect it. Today, we're incredibly excited to be hearing from Dr. Sira Wamaina. He's an associate professor at Dedan Kimathi University of Technology in Nyeri, Kenya, where he teaches electrical engineering and conducts research in a number of areas, including signal processing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, with a focus on environmental conservation applications such as bioacoustic monitoring of species. Since September 2019, he has led the Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, which aims to nurture the next generation of AI talent and develop solutions to real-world problems. Sarah also serves as the board chair of Data Science Africa, a grassroots capacity-building organization that runs summer schools and workshops across the African continent. And so we're really excited to hear today from Sira about the work he's been doing monitoring biodiversity in Kenya. Thank you, Sira. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and I hope you can hear me. Just let me share my screen. So I'm very excited today to be talking about the work we've been doing at the Center for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at Dedan Kimathi University of Technology in Nyeri, Kenya, where we work on developing AI-based biodiversity solutions. And just so that, to kick us off, just so that everybody knows where Kenya is and what we're talking about. So that's a map there. Kenya is in East Africa. And it's a very, it has a lot of interesting landscapes, but it's also quite diverse in terms of the areas that one could focus on in terms of even monitoring diversity, the taxa. And I think for our particular applications, I'm based in Nyeri, which is in the center of the country. If you look at the map there on the left of your screen, you'll see a purple dot that's right at the base of Mount Kenya, and also some areas near this central region of Kenya, which really serve as a lot of the water catchment areas and water sources, and also very rich in biodiversity. So Kenya is known a lot, maybe you know it for runners, but I want to give you a little bit of the taste of the work we do in AI and applications in biodiversity. I should also mention that my university has a conservancy, and that conservancy sometimes serves as a test bed for a lot of the applications we develop. So we develop them locally and then are able to deploy the solutions, test them out in larger ecosystems like the Mount Kenya ecosystem or the Aberdare ecosystem, and I'll be explaining a little bit of that to you. So just to set the scene, I want to share some of the inspiration for why we do the work we do. So these are some of the landscapes in areas where we do our field work. So what you see before you there is a drone image from a reforested stand within the Aberdare ecosystem that's closer to Nairobi than where I'm situated in Nyeri. And this is a source of a lot of the water drunk in Nairobi and other places. And you can see that it's an area that has some forest that was there, but it's been cut down, but is now work being done to reforest it. And this sort of scenes or ecosystems really serve as inspiration for people like myself who are in disciplines like engineering, and asking the question, how can we bring our expertise to bear in conserving ecosystems, or allowing people who are interested in conservation, reforestation, or things of that nature to actually better achieve their goals. This picture here, we took it when we were doing some field work in Mount Kenya. You can see the water. This water, really, you can drink it right from the river. Perfect water to drink. And as it goes down, you'd want to know what's the water quality people further downstream are getting. Or how can we ensure that these ecosystems and the biodiversity within them are maintained? So I also just want to bring to your attention the fact that when we are looking at ecosystems or monitoring them, we look at them from different dimensions. So you can take a lot of images, whether by drone or actually on mobile phone if you're taking photos of field work, but we are also interested in listening to the ecosystems and some of the soundscapes we hear. I wanted to just share a few of them with you, and I hope the audio is coming through. So what you're hearing now is vocalizations of a bird known as Atlas turaki that's endemic in our region, and it also really relies on forested ecosystems that are not fragmented. So once forest gets fragmented, the Atlas turaki habitat rate and populations go down. Very interesting soundscape. Another thing, but just to listen to, I really like this one, is the tropical bubu, very high pitched and very melodic, and sometimes it plays an interesting duet. But all these motivations for how can we, collect sufficient data to have proper pictures of ecosystems and to preserve biodiversity. And the way I look at things is, if depending on the data you're collecting, the taxa you're focusing on, the modality, you may have a certain picture of the ecosystem you're interested in. So we all know this parable of the blind man and the elephant, and depending on what you're holding on to, you get a different picture of what this beast is. But if by some means we could bring together all the different perspectives, you can imagine that we get a better understanding of, in the case of the blind men, they get a better understanding if they're able to pull all the different pieces of information they each have. And in our case, if you're looking at a particular ecosystem and perhaps you're able to collect different data modalities, drone imagery from the water sources emanating from the ecosystem, acoustic sounds that you're able to process, all those particular different data streams would, if properly analyzed, would perhaps give better information on how the ecosystem health really. And so that's really one of our motivations. So what we would like to do is to develop the systems that can collect, integrate, and analyze data and to aid ecological monitoring applications. And really what we like to think of is doing everything end to end. So we are involved in collecting the data, analyzing the data, feeding it back to ecosystem managers. And hopefully this gives us a very, a nice perspective on the ecosystem, similar to how you can imagine the astronauts on the Apollo seeing the blue marble. It gives you a better picture than when you're situated on Earth as to maybe perhaps the fragility of our ecosystems, and really what we need to do to ensure that we preserve this for future generations. So that really is the goal of all the work we do. And as I mentioned, one of the things we start with is collecting data. So the team at DSAIL has been doing a lot of work on data collection. And we started off doing bioacoustic data collection in the Mount Kenya ecosystem, starting off with the conservancy right next to our university. And here we were motivated by the fact that when you walk into any of the forests in Kenya, you hear a lot of bird biodiversity. And as engineers, we know how we can collect that data. And on talking to ornithologists, we started collaborating with ornithologists from the National Museums of Kenya, and we shadowed them as they would collect their data. So the picture you see on the left there is one of the fieldwork visits where we are collecting point count data. That's where you go and sit in a particular spot in the ecosystem, and you count how many birds you're seeing over a certain finite period. And I should say we are focusing on birds because we feel ecologists would say that they are an indicator species. They would respond to changes, and you can also easily, at least relatively, detect them because you can use both sight and sound. But then we are still left with the problem of here we are focusing on one taxa, and we are also using maybe one or two modalities, sight and sound. But nevertheless, it's a place to start. And the idea here is to ask the question: would a different data model if you just went to collect point counts, and if you also had the ability to leave recorders out in the field, would you be able to get a richer data set? Would you be able to perhaps allow ornithologists to perform different tasks? But then the question always becomes, well, once you collect all this audio data, who will process it and how will you process it? Because it's one thing to make it very easy to collect data, but then data is only as good as how you're able to analyze it and actually make some useful decisions from it. So we ended up being able to compare different ways of monitoring bird biodiversity. And I'll be sharing some results later, but essentially the first thing we did was collect data. And I'm sure a number of you may know about the audio moth, which is really one of the standard ways now we collect bioacoustic data. But we also have our own custom devices where we customize Raspberry Pis, and that opens up new possibilities. So just to delve into this a little bit, so what we did is we went into the Mount Kenya ecosystem and conducted point counts. Point counts really guided by ecologists. This is how the de facto standard of collecting bird biodiversity data. And then our job is to ask, if we put recorders in the same place, do we get a similar picture of the ecosystem? And this is will allow people to then say we can actually trust this methodology going further. And so yes, we collected traditional pound count data. We would mount recorders. So the picture is, you see field work. So like the river I showed you earlier was during these field work sessions, we would conduct the point counts, mount the recorders, and just collect data and be able to analyze it, and then say, yes, the acoustic recorders serve as a sufficient enough substitute for traditional point counts. Or they tell you this type of a picture and they can supplement point counts in this way. So the thing with data like this, it's important to be able to put it out for people to use it. And what we've been able to produce is an annotated data set of acoustic recordings annotated by expert ornithologists. So my colleague, Peter Njoroge, there is the head of the ornithology section at the National Museums of Kenya. And we recently published this data set on Dryad. We call it Ndegezetu, that's Swahili for our birds. And we were comparing different monitoring techniques, point counts, acoustic monitoring, and citizen science. Yeah, so the thing is that some of these recordings that we collected were quite interesting. You'd find a species of conservation interest, like we were able to record the Heinz bubbler in our conservancy. This particular bird is endemic to Kenya, endemic actually to this very central region, and it's not very easy to see. And actually, when people collect data, they use playback. But if you leave a recorder out there and you're not interfering with the ecosystem and come back and collect it later, we were lucky enough to have detected some Heinz bubbler calls. And similarly, from Mount Kenya, we saw this crowned eagle There's a lot of problems with raptors now. And but then listening to the recordings, the ornithologists were able to pick this out, and you can imagine that we can then use this further down for machine learning applications, AI applications. So that's one modality, audio. We've also been looking a lot at camera trapping. And the first thing we did was see, could we develop our own local camera traps to monitor our conservancy. And the conservancy has a number of species. You see a subset there, waterbucks, monkeys, warthogs, zebra. And just annotate this data set and make it available for people to be able to, use it, take different approaches to species identification. And I know species identification has really come a long way since we were producing this data set even 2 or 3 years ago. And still within camera traps, I think what's interesting is right now we are sort of seeing how we are looking at different taxa. So recall the image I was sharing of the elephant and the blind man. So if we are really to monitor an ecosystem and look at biodiversity, you need to monitor several taxa. And the more you can, I think that really what AI does for us is to be able to really monitor a wide spectrum. And interestingly, this has also led to some work with insects. So the UK Center for Ecology and Hydrology has produced a system called AMI. AMI stands for Autonomous Monitoring of Insects. And since we were doing a lot of work already at our university, collecting data from our conservancy, they loaned us one of the systems to just test how much data how would it work for data collection, and then perhaps downstream we would be able to add this data source to this other array of data sources that we have, camera trapping, audio data on birds. And then really you can imagine the picture of the ecosystem becoming more and more filled. And if you now then have a time series of this kind of data with other data sources, you can imagine the sort of picture of the ecosystem you're building, and it's becoming richer and richer because of the diversity of the data and your ability to analyze that data. So we've been deploying this right now almost for a year at our conservancy, collecting a lot of data, and that's now a gold mine really for our analysis and ecosystem monitoring efforts. Okay, so even as we get this data on the taxa, we also need to look at the habitat. So that's another thing, another aspect that we really need to have a handle on. And as I was showing you, remember the first picture I showed was a drone image from a reforested stand. So we were asked to help with seeing if we could use AI to monitor the regrowth of the forest. So what that entailed was, together with colleagues from our geospatial engineering department, we would fly drones over this reforested stand. It's around 400 hectares. And then just monitor the trees. So we started off this work in 2023, sorry, and I'll be able to show you some of the time series of the forestry growth. And what that has meant is, we go fly drones over the ecosystem, the environment. Right now, we're just collecting this modality, drone imagery and data from the ground. So we would obtain images like this, and an image like this can tell you a lot of things. You can, if you look at this over a number of months or even years, you would be able to tell if the trees are growing, if the survival rates, growth rates, and you can even detect species. So this is essentially a very interesting data source. And then downstream, this particular region is going to be inhabited by various species. You can imagine that it interacts with the hydrology of the region, because perhaps the reforestation will improve things. So essentially, we need to collect as much data as possible. And similarly, so what we would also collect in addition to the drone was ground measurements. So tree height, crown and basal diameter, because these are really seedlings, you can imagine. Traditionally, if you're monitoring forests, you'd look at diameter at breast height. But for young trees like this, basal diameter would do well. And then collect mobile phone imagery, because then you can do species detection and things like that. So this is a picture from one of our data collection exercises. So that then I hope I'm painting the picture that we're then sort of rounding things out. I was talking about these trees feeding into the catchment regions or the water. Remember, really one of the key things for us in Kenya is that the Mount Kenya ecosystem, Aberdare, they really are the water towers. And the biodiversity within them and the ecology is important because, you know, it's important in its own right, but we also as Kenyans derive a lot of benefits from it. First among them may be water. And so this is just a picture from actually one of the rivers in Kenya called the Waso. Further, it's really outside the central Kenya. So really all these streams flow really far out. And what we were interested in is, in this case now, developing IoT technology to monitor a simple measurement of stage. Stage is just the height of the water above the base of the riverbed. And what I'm going to try and paint to you is that all these different data modalities are important for you to be able to get a complete picture of the ecosystem. And I think AI provides this promise of being able to now, if appropriately integrated, allow us to actually pull this off. Whereas in the past, we may have had to focus on the bioacoustics and really get into that, or do the camera trapping and really get into that and leave the hydrology for the hydrologists. We can now sit together and have all this data talking to each other. So once we have the data, modeling is the next thing, and really where we bring our tools to bear. So the first thing we do, the first data set, and the first thing we did actually as a lab was look into audio data processing. The beauty about this is that I'll try and show you that essentially the different data modalities can sometimes be processed by similar techniques. So when we're processing audio, we essentially turn it into a picture. So the audio I played earlier would be transformed into what is known as a spectrogram. And really this picture would then be processed by AI to determine what bird is vocalizing, or what other sounds can I hear. So on the left is actually a spectrogram of a bird known as a brown woodland warbler, very common in Mount Kenya. On the mountain, actually, you don't get it much at my university. But I also wanted to show you the picture on the right, because on the left, the one of the warbler is just a single species on the recording. But on the right, you see that the recordings we often collect have multiple species. So I've tried to show you different species in different regions. And now the job of AI is to now pick this out. And I always find it fascinating as an engineer, and I know that this is organized by the Telecommunications Union, that this is essentially birds sharing spectrum. And I find it fascinating that in nature, this sort of things that we learn as engineers the examples are quite common. Okay, so right now, with a lot of developments that are happening in AI, what has really come about is that with large data sources available, databases, like for example, for birds and acoustic data, you may be familiar with Xenocanto. It has made it possible for people to train models. And often what happens is that these models, if you have access to the compute and good architecture, you can train a very good model. So BirdNet has now, and Patch from Google are really, I think, two of the leading models as far as acoustic classification of bird sound. And then what that allows people downstream is that you can use these big models as essentially a feature extractor. And then you can train small models for your own local context. So that's what we were able to do. So we collected all this data from Mount Kenya. And since we started collecting this data a long time ago, BADNet and Patch emerged I could say fairly recently. But we noticed how much easier it was for us to build models after exploiting BADNet or Patch. In other words, using them to extract good features for us to do our machine learning downstream. So that's what we did. And in fact, in a recent paper, we, together with Peter from the museums, we were then able to really process a lot of the data we already had using these AI models, and also then see how fine-tuning local models would do. So this paper appeared in June this year, and essentially this table comes from that paper. And here we are comparing BADNet, Patch, and a locally a model fine-tuned from Patch embeddings. So essentially implementing this pipeline, but using our data. And you can already see that for a number of species, I told you the brown woodland warbler is very common in Mount Kenya. And without our own local data, we wouldn't be able to have any classifier that's fit for purpose. But when you use Patch to extract embeddings and then train a simple neural network, you're able to do pretty well. And similarly for other species. You can, for more details, you can look at the paper. But essentially, it's becoming now a common practice that there are a lot of models out there that you can take and use for your own local application. And I'll show you that's the same in camera trapping, because we have this DSAIL Porini data set. What we were beginning to use it for was fast training classifiers. But the data from a small conservancy may be insufficient to train a really good classifier. But at least some of the things you may want to do is to identify like outlier species that you don't often see in the conservancy, and perhaps determine what is this species. And we would use it, for example, to screen impala data sets, so that we would not focus on the impala because it was fairly common, but we would want to see images of other species. Actually, when we started this off, we were interested in a certain predator, but we were unable to catch it on our camera traps. But nevertheless, you can use this locally. And here we're using YOLO to detect this impala. But then essentially what this led to, so that was a first attempt at processing camera trap images using local camera trap data. But that exposed us to the needs of actual conservancies, so bigger conservancies. So there's a conservancy in the northern part of Kenya called Muge Conservancy, and they have, lots of camera trap data. And also within that camera trap data, there are certain endangered species, for example, the Grevy's zebra. And so the Grevy's zebra is, it's different from the other version, a plain zebra. So you may notice on this picture, the Grevy has very thin stripes, and the plain zebra has broader stripes. And so what we intended to do was to develop a data processing pipeline for them to be able to process all this data, all the camera trap imagery they had, to be able to determine how many images of plain zebra and Grevy's zebra they were seeing in their data, and produce monthly reports. And so there, what we would do would be first apply a model to just determine if there is an animal we are seeing, and then do zebra classification, and then finally determine the species. So since then, a lot of more performant models have emerged that are really essentially almost solving the problem of species identification. And it leads us to now, perhaps the good thing about this is that there's always a new challenge to look into. And now what we're interested in is identifying individuals, especially for species which have clearly identifying marks and are of conservation concern, like the Grevy's zebra I was mentioning. So essentially, that's the part of some of the students at DSAIL are now beginning to look at this particular problem. Okay, so in terms of looking at our ecosystems, you remember the image I shared of the drone imagery taken, the earlier image was taken in 2023. But essentially what you would want to do is to look at the same region and look at your habitat over as a time series. So I'll show you an example in terms of the modeling of drone imagery. So this is the same fieldwork site visited in 2023 on the left and 2025 on the right. So it's actually the same plot. And what you'll notice is, I think it's quite different. One thing I should mention for people maybe not from Kenya is that on the left, you see that the tree locations are very clearly identifiable. That's because in Kenya, there's a program that allows farmers to plant food crops within reforested sections of the forest, as long as the trees are very small. And then as soon as the seedlings reach a certain height, then the land is left to essentially return to forest. So that's what you're seeing on the left, very clear lines. You can see, you can identify the tree locations. It becomes a bit even very difficult to identify where the same tree on the left and right. Maybe you can pause and see if you can identify one or two, but essentially that ends up being our job to then look at the entire 400 hectares and measure tree growth, crown height, crown diameter, and height. So again, big models that have been trained with lots of data come to the rescue here. There's a very good model called Deep Forest for crown detection. What we do is we use it for initial crown detection, but also then try and fine tune it to perform better with the data we have and with the data becoming as cluttered as it is becoming as the time series progresses. So there are a lot of interesting methodological problems that we also need to sort out. And then again, in the generative AI field, there are very interesting models such as the segment anything model that's come out of Meta, that essentially you prompt a pixel location and it can really identify a contiguous region that corresponds to a particular object. And you can imagine doing this for every pixel location or certain important pixel locations within our drone imageries. And then using them, if you know the same tree, you can monitor the area of the canopy and then see if there's growth happening. So this is essentially what that picture is trying to illustrate. So maybe I'll just briefly mention what we did in terms of linking the catchment data. So I told you we were monitoring stage. And essentially the way we would like to do this is we are monitoring forests, we're monitoring the biodiversity within the forest, but we also know that the forest is part of the hydrological cycle. And so what we would want is we would want to look at stage measurements of rivers and then essentially ask the question, what is the response between the rainfall and the changes in stage, changes in the height of the river? And essentially what that can help you with is as a proxy for the success of your reforestation efforts. Because as your forest becomes better and better established, you imagine that there won't be much flash flooding, for example, so that if it rains, there's enough percolation happening so that the response of the river is a bit more gradual and not as immediate as in a flash flood. So that has meant looking at rainfall data streams, and there's a very interesting data stream from Trans-Africa Hydrometeorological Observatory, TAMO, and we get access to the rainfall data from the regions we have of interest and are able to plot graphs like this, and just to see how are stage variables responding to precipitation. And then the idea is essentially to link this to the growth of the forest. That's essentially, it's a long-term vision, but essentially that's what we're trying to do. Now, once we've collected data, we've done modeling, you need to deploy. And deploying means a number of things. So one of the things we need to ask ourselves is all these AI models need to be in the hands of practitioners. And sometimes those practitioners may have limited computational resources. And so if you have a very big model, for example, one of these big models like Patch or BadNet, depending on if let's say you're a conservancy and depending on the resources available to you, you may not be able to run a big model, but you may be able to run what are known as distilled models. And so we need to be able to make sure that important local models, so here I'm thinking about models for the Mount Kenya ecosystem, various ecosystems in Kenya, are able to be used by practitioners on the ground. So that could mean a model running on a desktop that has been distilled from a bigger model, but just trained on local data. Or it could mean deploying these models on a Raspberry Pi that you've been deployed on the field to collect data. So what you see on the right is one of these Raspberry Pis that we've customized in our lab so that we can essentially deploy a Raspberry Pi into the field and have the Raspberry Pi running a distilled model that's trained on local bird species. So these sort of applications are important for taking all this AI down to the field so that you can be able to then get the information perhaps processed even as it's being collected. And that just shortens the cycle of decision making. Something else we've been able to do, because we work with conservancies, and yes, there are very interesting models that are being produced, but often what they're interested in is a tool that is very bespoke to their particular conservancy. So they may be interested in the zebras I was explaining. And then you then need, after doing all the analysis and developing the pipeline, to package it as an application that you can serve to a conservancy and they can run it offline. Because perhaps they may not want to upload data, or uploading may introduce latency that's unacceptable, or just maybe it would just be a waste of their time to be sitting trying to upload data sets. So it's turned out that actually thinking about how these models will be used is actually quite important. So what I think as I sort of wind this down is that the promise of AI is that it will allow us to really integrate, from where I sit, is integrate multiple data sources to obtain a really holistic picture of ecosystems, the biodiversity within them, the way they interact with the way multiple systems interact. So instead of needing to deal with perhaps just the biodiversity or just how the forest is growing or the tree health within a particular forest, you can also ask about interactions with hydrology, species, and I think that is potentially quite rich and gives us a lot of potential for interesting scientific discovery. And I think the interesting development with this foundation model trained on a lot of data is interesting because it allows smaller teams to really develop bespoke solutions. So you can have your own custom data set coupled with a big foundation model, whether it's Patch, BadNet, SpeciesNet, which now does a lot of the processing of camera trap data, or even a model like Dino, which in some areas does good canopy height estimation. Those can then be customized for local applications. But data collection and annotation in the local setting, you cannot do without it. So, and I think for people like myself who are more on the technology side and more of experts on the AI technology, to be able to develop useful technology, we always need to work with the ecologists, the hydrologists, the foresters, and engage in a dialogue that allows us to really optimize and really build systems that are fit for purpose. And essentially, we need to make sure that these systems get into the hands of the users. So I've been very privileged to be working with ornithologists from the museums, foresters, hydrologists, biologists, and I think without them, this sort of work would not be possible. And of course, the work is being done at a university, young university in Kenya. And it's important that that ecosystem, or the intellectual ecosystem now, is also robust and nurtures these youngsters, and also exposes people who are technologists to problems that are perhaps inspirational. You know, you look at the ecosystems we have, the nice drone images, the water flowing in Mount Kenya, that hopefully can inspire people to ask, okay, how the technology can actually be useful in this sort of setting. And since it introduces people to even things in ecology, biology, it's a nice synergy between basic sciences and computational ones. And I think that deep interdisciplinarity can only do good for both sides. And I think personally, we need very robust ecosystems within our universities. And the lab I lead, called DSAIL, we founded it in 2019. And the work I've been presenting here is really focused on the environmental aspect, but we also do things in health and agriculture, and also developing methods, because as I've shown you, we are encountering very interesting data sets and interesting methodological challenges, sorry about that. So that now require this team to develop interesting solutions. So this is a team. I just wanted to show them. This is a picture from a recent team, a course we were running on machine learning foundations. We had a visitor from the University of Cambridge, Professor Neil Lawrence, and the students were being exposed to machine learning and its application in different areas, especially in environment, as I've been showing you. But it's important that we now bring on board people with technological expertise to be able to bring their talents to bear on biodiversity monitoring, ecology monitoring, and essentially climate problems. So as you heard in the introduction, I'm also the board chair of this organization called Data Science Africa. And essentially, we run summer schools and workshops all over Africa since 2015, and really based on capacity building in AI, data science, and really focusing on this idea of end-to-end solution building. So collecting data, building sensor systems to collect data, and all the way to the models being in the hands of a user who then is making useful decisions. So that we bring together these students and expose them to teaching on methodology, but also then have a workshop where they see these solutions in action. Yeah, so that's where I wanted to end it. But before that, I'll want to share that all the work has been supported by partners, including ARM, Google. We got some funding from the Lacuna Fund. We are also part of the AI4D network that's funded by IDRC and the UK International Development, FCDO. So thank you very much, and I look forward to engaging with you in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for honestly an amazing talk. It's so impressive to see the diversity of the different applications that you've been able to kind of pull together and develop and build in these very specific contexts for the very specific needs of individual organizations. I actually thought that the first question that I wanted to ask you was one that maybe you were somewhat uniquely posed to answer, which is, you know, we can definitely see the potential and the value when we're using all of these different types of modalities of data, you know, bioacoustics, camera traps, drones, to sort of monitor more of the ecosystem, monitor more species. But one of the things I've been thinking about a bunch recently is the sort of what the trade-offs are in terms of the effort and the cost that it takes to collect, develop models for, and actually extract species out of these different types of data. I was curious if you could speak to your own experience of kind of like which of these types of modalities have been maybe the easiest to work with and or the most difficult to work with?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Very interesting. I think in terms of, I don't know if I can answer this in an unbiased way, because I come with it as having almost like my favorite modality. And I have to admit that my favorite modality is the audio modality. And I find it, I would say it's easy to work with, easier to work with. And it seems to me gives you a lot for, in terms of all the effort to collect the other data sources, it requires a significantly more investment. So
Can you
just
actually
from the
can you
experiences,
explain like a little bit more detail? Like what types of effort do camera traps or drones take to collect that bioacoustics don't?
Okay. So for example, if you want to fly drones, you have to go with all this associated geospatial machinery so that they can do the geolocation. That's added.
Yeah.
If you camera traps, sometimes one of the things, especially when we were using our own bespoke ones, which are not these really high-end ones with nice battery sources, is the issue of power would be, because now imagery takes much more power to collect. So those were some of the things. And then the fact that it's not omnidirectional sometimes can be an issue. And, you know, you mount your microphone, you're essentially getting, you're not occluded. So those are some of the challenges and interesting trade-offs, but yet there's things you really need to see. So when we're looking at the gravy, for example, you need to see it to be able to say that this is a particular individual. So I look at it as, I think it's almost like maybe the trunk may be easy to hold, but you still need to get a handle on the back as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think I've kind of had similar experiences where, you know, uh, some data types are readily available but difficult to work with. Some data types, you know, maybe the effort to go out and you know place the sensors or train the models has been more difficult, but then in the end it's kind of cheaper to deploy. So similarly, I guess, so you were just talking about the trade-offs in terms of the actual collection of the data, but have you seen any trade-offs on the AI side? Which of these models was kind of easiest to train and get the results that you were hoping for, relative to the effort it took to label data, et cetera?
Okay, so I think it's interesting because I think image modalities, because for AI, I think a lot of effort has gone into, you know, computer vision and, you know, object detection. And so if you're trying to do AI and not leverage all the work that's being done, I think that works very well. With audio, where you're working, when, for example, you have multiple species vocalizing on the same instance, doing techniques that handle that complexity are more difficult than the ones that, you know, will be able to detect multiple objects. So I
Right.
think those are some of the trade-offs there in terms of AI. And then another thing is size sometimes. For example, with drone images, the size sometimes becomes an issue. We've run into some interesting challenges even with the georeferencing and registration of the images. So those are interesting problems that we face.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess from that perspective, somehow um, types of data where you can benefit a lot from other work that's been done, from existing foundation models, from sort of prior efforts, particularly when then you're fine tuning or specializing to a specific context, that ends up having a huge benefit. Um, do you have a sense for like I could imagine, you know, with a lot of these efforts that people are putting into building better foundation models for acoustic data, that that might get a lot easier in the next few years. Do you, like have you seen a significant improvement? you mentioned how nice it's been to start from existing pre-trained models like Perch or BirdNet, but are you actually seeing kind of it get easier as the versions update and they're including more training data?
Yeah, I think so that's happening. I have to say that it's almost we haven't really looked into how much as the versions become better and better. It just means perhaps you don't need to even do as much fine tuning as I think essentially since we're able to do fine tuning, the ultimate end would be that the out of the box it's able to essentially detect local. Then essentially it's almost like it moves the needle to a different problem, perhaps now individual detection. So I think right now the benefits are already quite significant.
Yeah, that
That
makes sense.
I'm not too sure. I'm imagining that it will essentially free us essentially to look into even more challenging problems.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of my perspective as well. You know, I'm also someone who's working on a lot of these similar problems, trying to develop models and trying to come up with systems that work well off the shelf for a lot of organizations. And um, yeah, we've I think similarly found that like as the sort of bar raises in terms of like the starting point, it just means that it doesn't mean that there's no problems left. It just means that we can spend our time and energy focusing on the really hard stuff instead of kind of automating the really easy stuff. So I have there's a very interesting question from the audience from Jacob Frost. He said, "Thank you so much for the insights and incredible work you're leading, Sarah." And he was curious what collaboration looks like right now with neighboring universities or neighboring countries, and if you see opportunities for greater impact through new forms of collaboration and partnership locally on the continent.
So I think I really think none of this work would be, would happen without collaborators. So essentially, the way our lab works is we essentially almost have an open door policy in terms of getting collaborators from nearby universities because we're relatively unique in terms of really focusing on the environment. We sometimes get people coming in and from other universities and working on, I can say, for example, looking at patch and looking at how perhaps to distill it. So essentially, that the way collaboration looks like with other universities is essentially being able to welcome researchers from all universities around us. But a lot of the collaborations that have really allowed us to do the actual work are with ecologists, with conservancies. So access to data is important, access to sites. So being able to actually, you can't just wake up and fly a drone over these forests. You need permits, you need all that. So that's essentially how collaboration looks like. And also asking these questions about reforestation. You begin to, when you sit with foresters, it really opens your mind to what sort of questions one needs to ask. For example, how would you identify species from a drone image? One may think it's trivial or easy, but then you sit with foresters and they really show you the difficulties that you need to take into account when you even flying your drone so that you collect the appropriate data. So I hope I'm answering the question, but essentially that's how our collaboration looks like for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I similarly, I share this experience of like none of the work being possible without deep collaboration and building relationships and trust with many different types of people and different types of partners. One of the things that I've found is very important is communicating to some of these collaborators, like helping them build some intuition about what AI is going to be likely going to be good at and what it is still going to struggle with. Have you similarly like how do you kind of handle that communication aspect of trying to help users understand like where AI should be trusted and maybe where it shouldn't?
Yeah, and I think that's become more difficult post ChatGPT
Yeah.
because now some people may wonder whether what you're doing is still AI because they don't see a chatbot, or they're not doing any prompts. But essentially, I try to. So essentially, it's making the AI as invisible to people who. I mean, it's okay to if somebody really wants to get into the details of what's happening, but I think the idea of co-developing is very important, so that you almost manage expectations. This is what can be done, and this is what cannot be done. And this is where and I think the thing I've been trying right now is to manage anxiety, because there's anxiety that's coming across, because we work with domain experts. And there's this, due to the hype surrounding AI, there's this idea that, AI will replace everyone. And so you have to be careful and show that really here, this is a tool to help you with your work. And you are indispensable as an expert in how the hydrology of the Mount Kenya ecosystem. That expertise is not to be taken for granted. I think those are some of the new discussions that are emerging from when talking about AI and what it can and can't do, and also managing all the hype that's coming in, that's saying, it'll essentially replace us all.
Yeah, I think ChatGPT has sort of led people to believe that AI is magic. Um, and in fact, when you actually get down into really difficult problems and problems in the real world where you need robust solutions, where you need to understand truth, not something that just sounds likely, it's not magic.
Yeah. It's a good thing for them to also see that, yes, there's some humility that for even us as technologists who are working on such problems, it tapers down this overreach of like AI can do everything. So I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
serves as a nice damper for the
Yeah.
system.
So maybe one final question is, what what do you see remains like the biggest bottleneck to scale? So, you've done some really amazing work with individual locations, organizations. If you wanted to take this work and scale it to, every conservancy in Kenya, like what is the thing that's still like the most difficult when you're talking about trying to scale in this way?
That's a difficult one. I think to me right now, it's having robust proofs of concept
Mm,
that you can, hand on heart say, yes, this system, or this way of this small low scale instantiation of whatever integration of technologies or whatever data analysis, data collection pipelines actually answers the questions that people need answered, and saying hand on heart, it works.
yeah.
And to me, essentially, it's just a matter of time doing the science that will then say, yes, we can do it in this way. And once you can do that, then I think I'm more convinced that will be what is necessary to scale things, because it'll open all the doors. And I think that to me would be it. So doing the work to actually have that nice contained.
Yeah, I that makes sense to me. It matches my experience as well. That like needing to go, from a proof of concept of the technology and the ability to, for example, identify occurrences of species to the actual, ecological trends and goals that these organizations have. And really, like I like the way you said it, hand on heart, like this belief from the technologists and from the ecologists that the system is reliable and trustworthy, or that we have the right mechanisms to correct, verify, adapt these systems as things change. I agree. I think we're surprisingly still kind of far from that in terms of the technology itself, right? We have these
Yeah, I
like
think the
one-off proofs
challenge
of
is
concept, but
the challenge is that it's a difficult problem, and it's a problem that the time scales at which you need to do the observation alone.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, because you can't monitor an ecosystem in a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, there's one more question from the audience before we wrap up. And I think it's probably a bit of an easy one. So Joel T. Muhanguzi asks, could there be opportunities for PhD research to contribute to the improvement and scalability of the bioacoustic sensors?
Would there be opportunities for PhD research?
Yeah.
Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Yes, the answer, that's an easy one. The answer is yes, a big yes.
A big yes. Wonderful. So maybe you can reach out. So thank you so much, Sira. I really enjoyed the talk. Again, it's just so impressive seeing all of the sort of work that you're doing, not just building the AI models, but actually really thinking about the system end to end and deploying these things in the real world. It's I'm so impressed, and it's always so great to talk to you. But thank you so much.
Thank you. That's very kind, and thank you very much, and even for all the good work you do and for the moderation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.